Hey, beautiful good morning to you from Panuka Farm. If this is the first time that you're actually coming on, this Panuka YouTube channel, this is Mr. Panuka, the CEO and founder of Panuka Farm. So I think some weeks ago we did report that we had quite an onslaught of rains, and that has actually affected our open field production across different crops. So we have quite a number of crops that we do farm in open field, much as we have quite a good portfolio from the greenhouses. As it were, much as it's advised that you need to have very few crops on the farm. I think the rule of thumb from some of the horticulture gurus is that you need to make sure that you have one or two crops where you get say 70% of your revenue, but then you can have a smaller portfolio that accounts for say 30 to 40% of your revenue, and that's what we do in open field. We have a few crops that gives us that 30% of our revenue, but of course our main focus is in terms of the 70% is what is in the greenhouse, because there's certainty in terms of how we do the production, and we do that throughout the year, given that it's kind of a controlled environment. In open field, it's really a gamble, and I think we got a real test this rain season, given that it became very difficult for us to sustain the crops that are in open field. Wind pressure and just generally a very wet environment. So that was very difficult for us to sustain open field farming, and this is why we actually called it a huge gamble if you entirely depend on rain-fed agriculture. So climate change manifestations are actually quite real, and unfortunately if you're talking about commercial farming where you've got contracts to deliver and things like that, I think the weather pattern that manifested itself in terms of this onslaught of rains can actually pose quite a huge challenge to you meeting those contractual obligations. So what we're going to do is just to take you around in open field, just see the ruins of what has remained from this onslaught of rains. But I think come April going forward, you'll actually go see quite some very huge turnaround in our open field production. Of course, the cold is coming. That will slightly affect our open field farming, but generally I think the parameters are a bit more controllable. So tag along as we journey through just our open field production, so that you see the damage, as it were, and what we are actually able to salvage, because again you need to choose your battles. I think the cost of weeding became way too high, and so we had to let some of the crops just get invaded by the weeds because it was quite a huge challenge. So tag along, let's just check around some of our open field crops and see what we have. All right, so in this field we had zucchini squash, or baby marrow as it were. Planted it very well, but again, due to the onslaught of the rains, it became very difficult to maintain this crop. Look at the weed pressure, but also there was nutrient leaching. You can actually see this is the zucchini squash plant. We had a lot of deformities in terms of fruits, general yellowing of leaves, much as we were actually applying quite a number of nutrients, but I think it became just very difficult and too costly to maintain this crop. And so we'll just be plowing over this and restart now that the rain seems to be saying bye. Of course, we expect it to come around and say bye-bye, and sometimes when it's actually saying bye, it comes with a venom. So we need to be a bit more cautious and perhaps make sure that it's really gone. Okay, so this is one of the fields that became a casualty. Very difficult to maintain the crop. And here we have some sweet corn. I think we'll be able to salvage something from here, but there was quite an onslaught also of armyworm, but also just nutrient leaching was the order of the day. You can see this yellowing of the sweet corn leaves, but I think we'll be able to salvage something just to recover the seed costs. But this is not the best in terms of just production. But I think now that the rain has kind of stopped or reduced, we are bound to have much better production. This is the younger crop of sweet corn. Of course, now we have to hook up either the rain hose or the drippers, in terms of irrigation, because it's already getting dry. Perhaps that's a downside. We wish the rain was a bit more moderate. But yeah, this is sweet corn, the next stage from the other one that we just showed you. With this one, we're quite optimistic that we'll be able to salvage this crop. So this is another section of sweet corn that is in open field. But what you also see is that we have quite a lot of gaps. So I had to actually do a bit of gapping. The germination was quite poor at the time when the rain was pouring in quite heavily. So again, these are some of the scars of the rains. Quite some very poor germination, and even when we applied like decompound or some of the basal fertilizers, they were actually leached due to the excess rain. So this field of sweet pepper is from last year, 2020, 23rd September. So it seems to have survived the rains, and still giving us a few decent fruits, though I think the quality of fruits got compromised quite heavily. You can see the deformities, but it still has a bit of life. So you can actually see it's heading to about 5 to 6 months in open field. So that's quite good, but it's the size, quality of fruits that's not very impressive at this moment. And there's also quite a lot of disease pressure. You see that? It looks like blossom end rot. You can actually mistake it to be sun scald. So it could be a combination of all those facets. So this is one field of open field. Sweet pepper seems to have survived the rains, but doing reasonably well. Then we have this one. This one was transplanted on 4th of December 2020. So let's just take a look at how it's doing at the moment. So this is the open field sweet pepper. This one seemed to have actually survived the rains, and we have slightly much better performance from this field. Some sizable fruits, and so very soon we're just going to make sure that we intensify on weeding and also on the nutritional aspect, given that the nutrient leaching took a toll on this crop and many other crops that we've shown you. Okay, but otherwise you see that you can actually do some very decent open field farming. It's not always about greenhouse farming, and you can actually see that at Panuka Farm we have quite a large portfolio of open field crops. So we're trying to just trellis this, but of course not as stringent as the greenhouses. But you see we have these poles, and then we put the wire here and the twines where we wind the crop. But what you actually see is that it doesn't get as tall as the greenhouses. But actually the varieties that we use are the same in the greenhouses and in open field. but very different performance. So those are some of the realities, of open field versus greenhouse farming. With this section, we have, brinjals doing quite well. They seem to have withstood, the heavy rains. Though I think in the other sections, we saw quite a number of casualties in terms of just sustaining the seedlings when we transplanted them around January. But it's a much tougher crop. You can actually see, I think it's still standing, though we're seeing quite some effects in terms of just leaching, nutrient deficiencies here and there, quite some yellowing of leaves. So this is something that we're actually going to fix. So yeah, that's eggplant or brinjals as it were, and so far it's doing quite well in terms of fruiting, despite the effect on the rains. So here some of the fruits, and we have quite a lot. We've actually been harvesting. It's been 2 weeks since we commenced harvesting in this field, and so far we have some very excellent fruits. There you go. And quite a number of them are still emerging, so we just need to sort it out in terms of just the nutritional deficiency, and revive it. And we're also going to do some gapping on some of the sections where we have quite a number of gaps. So that's eggplant or brinjals as it were. At least we seem to have a much better crop that survived from the rains. This land is a bit sloppy, so we also had quite a bit of a knock in terms of just the water running downwards. Maybe in future we might have to reorient this field so that it cuts across. We'll see, but we prefer most of our fields to do an east-west orientation in terms of airflow and sunlight. When you do it across, you're kind of blocking airflow and also sunlight. So yeah, we have to gauge in terms of orientation, and also in terms of the facets of wind direction and the sun, because what you don't want is to actually create a shade where some of the crops that are on the eastern side provide a shade on the ones that are on the western side within the same field. So you need to avoid that. So that's some of the tidbits that you need to take into account when you actually do orientation of your fields. All right, so let's get to another crop and just see how we're doing with our open fields farming. But so far, this one seems to be at least one of those few that have survived the onslaught. So this is another section of our open fields, sweet pepper, again designated to be harvested as green. And as you can see, it's actually a different stage from the other ones. So it's all about sequencing. You can see it's actually beginning to fruit. So at this stage we actually need to remove the first fruits. That's the name of the game in sweet pepper if you want some very good productivity. So usually we have to remove the king fruit. Those are some of the first fruits that actually usually emerge in sweet pepper. And unlike those that do field crops like maize, where you've got to go for a kill in terms of quantity at a go, with horticulture farming, in our way of supply, it's about consistency. So we always have to have different stages of the same crop to make sure that you're in the market throughout. And this is why you actually see that we have different stages of each crop in small quantities. So this one is roughly, I think, about 2,000 plants. Coming up very well, and I think this week we need to actually trellis this. This is also another section that was besieged by the rains and that came with a lot of weeds. Okay, so it's about smaller pieces. Okay, 2,000 different, stages. The intention is just be in the market throughout. So this little field we transplanted on the 5th of February 2021. The variety is called Red Jet. You actually see that we have Red Jet in the greenhouses, but this one is in the open field designated to be harvested as green. So that's another section of our open field sweet pepper. So this section is some newly transplanted sweet pepper. Going for double lines here. That's maximizing the usage of land, and we put 2 drip lines, not single one, for effectiveness in terms of irrigation. And you see this place looks quite small, but it's actually able to accommodate around 8,000 seedlings because of the way we transplanted. So very, very critical in terms of just planning the field and how you arrange your lines, maximize usage of land. So for all our open field sweet pepper, the intention is actually to harvest them as green. Due to sun scald, we don't wait for them to turn color. So with this field, we actually planted a variety called Diva. This is a yellow variety, and those that do pepper will know that for some reason yellow pepper is more aggressive in terms of growth. It's quicker and more prolific than red, for whatever reason. So we prefer to use yellow pepper for green. One critical issue that you actually see that you need to take care of is the issue of drippers. You actually see this one has not been receiving some adequate water. It's because this ammeter here is blocked. So you always have to go into the field and just make sure that the ammeters are unblocked, so that water starts flowing. And you can actually see when you just massage it a bit, water actually begins to come out. And of course you always have cases of leakages, so we need to fix this. So that's quite common, especially when you just transplanted and using some of the old drippers. And sometimes it's also a question of wrong positioning. So like this seedling was actually put where there's no ammeter, so we need to fix all this. So if you don't fix some of these aspects, this is where you actually just see a number of seedlings dying off. So it's very, very important that you go through quite thoroughly to check what's going on. Very, very important, because as the pepper grows, it'll be very difficult for you to actually see how effective the ammeters are working. So when the seedlings are still this small, it's actually the best time to go in and just check the effectiveness of the ammeters, so that you have even growth. So this is also what determines the the growth rate across the field. That's where you see sometimes a certain section that is growing very well, then some sections are not growing, very well. It's this variability in terms of watering, and also sometimes nutrient supply. So having gone through the various open fields, one alternative is the shed net, which we've previously presented. But what you see is that water does actually come in here. So all that onslaught of rain actually used to also get to this shed net. But what you see is that the production in the shed net is far much better compared to the open field. Look at just the way the outlook of the sweet pepper in here. Excellent by any measures. Look at the quality of fruits and just the general outlook of the crop. So yes, the rain might actually affect open field, but I think when you look at the shed net, where the rain actually comes through inside, but you see that the productivity is actually far much different. If you look at the height of this, it's almost comparable to a greenhouse. So you don't have to just confine yourself to open field. You can actually see that if you did shed nets, the general outlook of your crops will actually improve. So if you're having issues with finances, you don't necessarily need to rush for the full-blown greenhouses. The shed net will actually be able to improve just the general outlook of your crop. And this is a testimony. This one would not cost you too much, but if you can get it right in terms of getting some durable material, that would be good. You can actually use much cheaper net than this one, but this one will actually last you quite for some time. So that's something that you need to take into account. Okay. So you actually be able to also see that be it strawberries, if you do them in a shed net, they actually come out much better compared to open fields. So you can actually do a combination of open fields and then perhaps do some shed nets. Just getting to admire this butterfly. Looks beautiful. Yeah, so in farming you've got to embrace biodiversity. Yeah. All right, so hope you can actually get some tidbits on just the efficacy of a shed net, compared to just general open field farming. You actually get much better crops. So that was our 360 review of our open field crops, and some of the notable issues that you could actually see is that different crops responded differently to the onslaught of rains. Some of the crops are a bit more tolerant, others are weaklings, and I think they were hit quite badly. You actually note that sweet pepper has done much better, followed by the brinjals or eggplants right here where we are. I think these have done much better. And I think third on the list is our sweet corn. I think that one has tried. We've been able to harvest quite a bit. But I think the worst hit has been, our iceberg lettuce in open field, and also the zucchini squash or courgette. Those two have actually been the worst hit. So again, every year you're learning, when it comes to rain season, what exactly can you plant in open field to avoid unnecessary losses. So those are some of the lessons that you pick up every day. Farming is a challenge. It's a journey. It's a school. You keep learning every day. Now, besides, I think, showing the effects of the rains, one of the other things that we wanted to also ensure that you get from this video is that even in open field, you can actually do quite a bit. I know most of the newbies in farming, especially when you visit farms like Panuka Farm who have greenhouses and other farms, you get energized, you quickly want to get into greenhouse, farming. It's very expensive. And if you don't have the money, you probably have to wait, begin to farm in open field. It's possible. There's actually quite a bit that you can get, in open field. And we started like that. It took us 2 to 3 years for us to get into greenhouse farming. So don't be too quick when your financial base cannot support greenhouse farming. It's quite expensive. And even then, when you do it, you need to make sure that you're farming, high value crops, so that there's good payback, on your greenhouses. So you can actually see there's quite a bit that you can do in open field. Some of the crops can actually do quite well. So start from there, and learn the trade, before you actually get into the greenhouses, because the greenhouses, besides just being expensive, you need to make sure that you've got the expertise to farm in there, so that you get a good return. It's got its own, sophistication in terms of how you do crop management and things like that. So from this video, pick the fact that you can actually do some farming in open field. It's very possible, but of course with mixed results. Again, we love to tell the truth. Greenhouse will actually give you the best, production, but you can also start with shade nets, like we just showed you, and you can also do in open field. But just be careful about what crops you put in open field, depending on the weather. Because when you actually get to cold season again, comes with its own shenanigans. There are a few crops that don't do very well. Come to hot season again, there are some crops that will not do well in open field. So you need to make sure that you're profiling, your crops based on the weather, so that you get the best out of your inputs. So thank you so much, and have a lovely one. Mr. Panuka signing out. Bye-bye.